Well, this is one of those passages that when you read it kind of makes you go, whoa. And that's not only because it's structured around a series of 5 woes that were read out for us by Chris just now. And as we've been going through the book of Habakkuk, you'd be forgiven for thinking this is a pretty dark situation that we keep coming to every single week. And the theme of the message this morning is how faith brings clarity to us, how faith is supposed to help us as people of faith see both ourselves and the world in which we live and what's coming with clarity. And what's funny is that actually Christians, people of faith, shouldn't be people that are overly naive or optimistic on the one hand, or overly down and dour and pessimistic on the other hand. But like so many other times in the Bible, a Christian isn't just sort of a thin gruel in the middle. We're not sort of trying to find a happy middle ground between not getting too far on one side or too far on the other side. Actually, to be a Christian, to be a person of faith, is to be both incredibly pessimistic and incredibly optimistic at the same time. Both of those approaches to the world at the height of their energies. And see, in Habakkuk, we've seen so far how faith and doubt, how questioning God are not mutually exclusive. We've seen actually how acknowledging doubt and moving through those questions to a greater faith is how you actually strengthen your faith in the end. Right? We've seen how faith is supposed to teach us patience, that we're supposed to wait patiently and yet actively for God to act on our behalf. And today what we're going to see is how faith in God gives us a view of the evil times that we're going through that is completely unique, completely without comparison among all world cultures and religions and worldviews. See, living by faith in a fallen world should give the Christian great clarity about themselves and about the world around them. And that is what this passage, and I would argue the entire book of Habakkuk lays out for us, right? So what kind of clarity then does faith bring to living in a difficult, a fallen, and an evil world? What exactly is it that we're helped to see? And I think in this passage we're told 2 broad things that we are supposed to see through faith. Firstly, you're enabled by faith in God to see to the heart of the problem with the world. You can actually see what the true evil at the heart of everything is. And it's not a conspiracy theory. It's an unveiling of what the real problem is. That's the first thing. The second thing is we are able to see the hope that is coming for the world. Right? We're to look inward to the evil that is in the world, and we're to look forward and outward and upward to the hope that is coming. And we're going to look at those 2 things here this morning through this passage. Firstly, if you're going to be a person of faith and clarity in a world like this, you need to be able to see into the heart of the evil in the world. Because I'm sure that if I were to ask you, what do you really think the problem is with the world right now? We might have some broad sweeps of an answer, but most people will inflect that answer in different ways. Most of us will lump the problems of the world in one bucket, and other people will lump the problems with the world in another bucket. You know, if you read the different newspapers at the moment, if you go online and check them out, you will usually get opposing views of what the real problem with the world is based on the kind of political or social leanings of each of the newspapers, right? The Daily Mail and The Guardian are going to have 2 different ideas about what is wrong with the world. And I don't know if you remember, back when the last Conservative government got into power all those years ago, what did they do? They blamed the previous government for all of the problems that they had, quote unquote, inherited. That's kind of what you do when you get into power. Well, skip forward to when the Labour government came into power in England, and what did they do? Well, they blamed everything on the Conservative government that had came before them and said that they were inheriting all of the problems from them. See, it's endemic amongst human beings to look at what came before and to blame the problem on someone else and blame the problems on something else. Right? If you ask a more broad question about what the problems are, some people will say, well, the real problem with our country and our world right now is untrammeled immigration, or the liberalization of our schools and our universities and our moral values. That's really what the problem is. Right? Other people will say, well, no, actually, the real problem is these multinational corporations. It's billionaires and millionaires basically doing what they want with all their money and not providing enough money for social care. Do you see? Everyone would slice the cake differently as to what is wrong with the world. But the Bible, and Habakkuk in particular, gives us a better way of seeing things. It shows us that everything I've just listed are just symptoms. They're just the presenting symptoms of a deeper problem with the world. And it is a problem that has existed almost since the world began. Right, when we look at this passage here that Chris read for us, there's a list of 5 woes that is read out against the Babylonian Empire that God is going to use to judge his people. Right, we know that God's people have become corrupt. So God says to Habakkuk, I'm going to bring the Babylonians down, and I'm going to judge my people and send them into exile. That's what I'm going to do. And Habakkuk says, well, why are you doing that? They're worse than your people are. But then God says, don't worry, because I will judge the Babylonians as well. Their time is going to come. And there's this long list of sins that you get in this passage, like predatory business practices and violence to the land and to the animals, the drunkenness, sexual immorality. There's this list of sins. But what I want you to notice here this morning is there's an organizing principle behind this list in verses 5 and in verses 18 through 19. Right, what are they? Well, verse 5 mentions arrogant pride. And verses 18 to 19 tackle idolatry, the worship of created things rather than the Creator. See, here it is. This is what you have to see. These 2 things are the problem. These 2 things are the problem with the world as we find it right now, and actually have been almost since the world began. Arrogant pride and idolatry, worshiping the creation instead of the Creator. Right? Verse 5 picks up on the talk of arrogance in verse 4 as well. And verse 4 describes the proud man as a restless person. It talks about them having greed, doesn't it? Greed as wide as the grave. Greed as wide as death itself. Always eating, always consuming, never satisfied. There's this insatiable appetite for glory. There's this insatiable appetite for power and prestige and honor and all of these things. Right? So there is where you find the Bible's definition of pride. That's what pride is. Pride is being empty and having an insatiable appetite to fill yourself with glory. Pride is basically covering yourself in glory to fill a sense of emptiness in your life, to fill a lack of glory, the glory gap in your life, a sense of emptiness, a sense that there's something missing, that if you were able to just fill that gap, then your life would mean something. Then you would be happy. And that is what the problem is. In fact, if you look back and you read what early Christians wrote, they saw pride as the original sin. Back in Genesis chapter 3, ancient Christians like Augustine read that passage and said that it was pride that motivated Adam and Eve to do what they did. See, what are they tempted away from God by? Right, Satan tempts Adam and Eve away from God by promising them something. He says that when you eat of this fruit, you will become like God. You'll climb onto his throne. And by climbing onto his throne, you will get all the glory that you so richly deserve and have been so cruelly denied by God. And by doing so, you will push him off of his throne. See what Satan does there? Satan appeals to their sense of pride. And by the way, this is how most sin works in our lives. When we choose to indulge in certain sins, it is usually because we're trying to indulge a sense of pride. You're tired and you deserve this. Your life is so hard for you. You deserve a break. You should do that thing or not do that thing. You should say that thing or not say that thing. That person doesn't really understand you. You should be actually quite blunt with them and cruel to them because otherwise they won't understand you because you deserve to be understood. Do you see how that works? Pride. Pride motivates so much of the things that we do. The writer John Stott from All Souls down in London, he picks up on this in a great book of his called The Cross of Christ. I don't know if you've read it. He says this: the essence of sin is man substituting himself for God. That's pride. That is what sin is. In fact, all other sins can be said to stem from this pride, whether it's a sense of being better than other people and being on your hobby horse and high up there, if you feel you have more glory than people, or the opposite end of the spectrum, if you feel worthless because you have less glory than other people. You know, pride works from both ends of the spectrum. It manifests itself both in arrogance and insecurity. So even insecure people like me, we don't get to escape from the charge of pride. Such a problem is it in the human race. And the point being made by Habakkuk here is not just that pride drives individuals, though we'll get onto that. He's saying pride is driving an entire nation. That the nation of Babylon is driven by this desire and this need for glory. So international relations, if you like that kind of thing, or international politics or history, can be read as nations trying to gain glory over another nation, trying to win for themselves empire and honor and wealth. I mean, just read your history and you will realize it. All the way from the Babylonians to the Romans to medieval Europe to the era of Napoleon to the First World War and the Second World War to the Cold War, all the way up to the conflict in Ukraine today, it is all about the insatiable appetite, wide as death itself, for glory and for pride, right? But here's how it works on an individual level. I don't know if you've read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Really good book. He actually wrote that. It was a series of lectures during World War II. And there's a great chapter in that book on pride. You can find it online. And he makes the point that this pride that we're talking about here, that Habakkuk is bringing up, is essentially competitive. Pride is competitive in nature. Pride doesn't just delight in having a lot of something. Pride delights in having more of something than somebody else. Right, here's what Lewis says. Pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man. We say that people are proud of being rich or clever or good looking, but they're not. They're proud of being richer or cleverer or better looking than others. If everyone else became equally rich or clever or good looking, there would be nothing to be proud about. It is the comparison that makes you proud. Right, think about it this way. Why would a millionaire want to become a billionaire? It can't be because they want more stuff. Right? Millions and millions of pounds can buy you pretty much any luxury that you could possibly want. No, the reason that a millionaire would want to become a billionaire was because they want to be richer than somebody else. They want to be richer than everyone else. And let me try and bring this to the church level here, how pride actually can work in a church, because we are not exempt. Pride can be alive and well in a congregation of people also. We can actually smuggle pride into the heart of Christianity. This kind of pride that Habakkuk is talking about that is so dangerous, we can actually take it and smuggle it into the way that we think about our service to the church. Right? We can pay lip service to being nothing before God, to being a humble sinner who just needs grace, but we can actually deep down really feel like we're doing a lot better than the person sitting next to us in the seats on Sunday. We can look down on people who don't attend a certain part of a service. We can look down on people who maybe aren't part of a small group. We can look down on people whose lives don't seem as put together as ours. Now, I'm not saying any of those things, coming to a small group or going to a different service or reading your Bible more or praying more, are bad things. That's the point. Pride takes good things and elevates them above where they should be. Christians can be so proud as well. Maybe you've been a part of a congregation in the past that has been riddled, shot through with pride and is never satisfied. We tend to think of ourselves as not as sinful, as more respectable, more knowledgeable about church and the Bible. And listen, this is something that I have to struggle with as well as a pastor. You know, one of the reasons that people say that they come to TCF is not just because of me, but it's because of the quality of the Bible knowledge in this church. The average person in this church knows their Bible pretty well. And the teaching, whether it's here on a Sunday or at the communion service or in small groups, is generally of a fairly high quality. But then pride starts to set in. Because we can start to think, well, we're so much better than that church down the road because people are coming here for the Bible teaching. And that's really the most important thing. Do you see how that works? Friends, even we, like Babylon, can smuggle pride into the way that we do church. We also are part of the problem. So pride is a huge issue. And faith actually puts its finger on it and helps us to see the issue of pride clearly. But again, verses 18 and 19 connect this to idolatry. Idolatry is the source of human evil in our society, right? What is idolatry? I've already kind of mentioned it, right? Idolatry is building your life and your worth and your glory on anything other than God. That's what idolatry is. It is substituting a created thing for the Creator, who alone deserves worship. And any culture or any person's life that is not based on the glory of God will inevitably take some good created thing and they will elevate it to an absolute value, without which they cannot live. And again, this works on both an individual level and on a national level. Think about the UK. I think in the UK, it's safe to say that we have made an idol of individual freedom and individual choice. We have elevated that to an absolute value. So much so that we're willing to countenance assisted suicide, a person's freedom of choice to choose the end of their life. That is a sign of an idolatry within our culture. But when individual freedom is elevated to this ultimate value, it leads to all sorts of other kinds of disastrous things, right? It leads to divorce. It leads to the breakdown of the family. It leads to a deeply fractured and divided society. It leads to a suspicion and hatred of foreigners and the others. It leads to children being allowed to irreversibly change their given gender. And I could go on and on and on. And sexual immorality is definitely highlighted by Habakkuk in places like verse 15 and in other places in this book. Sexual immorality as a result of idolatry is absolutely a part of the picture. But here's what's interesting. Alongside those moral sins that we've talked about, you also get things like the effect our sin has on the created world. Environmental degradation. Right? Habakkuk picks up on this in verse 17. Verse 17 talks about Lebanon. Lebanon was this richly forested area. And it became an image of empires taking trees down to build their temples to their idols, or to build their rich houses, or to make siege engines to go and conquer other places. They devastated the landscape to fill their idolatry and their pride and their sense of glory. See, sin doesn't just affect the moral realm, like your heart inwardly. Sin also affects the creation, the physical world around us as well. Let me give you an example. I looked at some photos taken by a guy named Chris Jordan this week. He's an environmental photographer. And there's a place called Midway Island in the Pacific. And this island has a huge colony of albatrosses. So he went to Midway Island to take a picture of these amazing birds. If you've ever read the poem The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, there's a pretty famous albatross in that poem, sidebar. But he went to go and take pictures of these albatrosses. And here's what he found. He found that apparently that the world's seas have become so polluted by the throwaway plastic of our consumer society that these albatrosses who fish the seas, they scoop it up in their beaks and they inadvertently feed it to their young. And then the stomachs of their young are so full of this kind of plastic-coated nothingness that there's no room left for any real food. So what they do is they starve to death surrounded by plenty, because they are so full of nothing. I mean, if that is not an image and a picture of what our current culture and world is like, then I don't know a better one. We're starving to death because we are so full of nothing. Now, if you read the Bible, what it says about idols is that idols aren't really real. They are empty. They are nothingness. They are vapor. And yet we build our lives and our cultures around them, so we are so full of nothing that we don't have any appetite for real food. We don't have any appetite for the gospel. We're full of distractions. We're full of trying to worship created things rather than the Creator. Do you see what the problem is? I mean, Habakkuk is absolutely merciless about that. And what's so important here is that Habakkuk is not just listing one kind of sin and ignoring another kind of sin. He's actually listing both kinds. Right? If you talk to some people, they'll say that the environmental stuff is the only sin worth caring about today. Right? We need to be caring for our environment, and that needs to be our top priority. On the other hand, you'll get people saying that sexual immorality and all of these social sins are actually what we need to truly be worried about. But you see that Habakkuk and the Bible and faith gives you the clarity to say no. Both of those things are symptoms of deeper problems, pride and idolatry. Yes, we should tackle them, but by tackling them, we shouldn't think that we're getting to the heart of the issue, because only the gospel can heal the heart of the issue. Faith gives you the eyes to see through the fog of all the claims of what is wrong around you. Faith enables you to truly see the idols that are at work in your life and in the life of our culture and our society, because these idols sow the seeds of their own destruction. So friends, the first point I want to make this morning is don't just look out there and see the problems with the idols and the sin and the idolatry and the pride out there. You need to realize that what Habakkuk is realizing is that the line of good and evil runs through every single human heart. And the line dividing good and evil runs through churches as well. The whole point of the book of Habakkuk is that God is going to judge his people. The line of good and evil runs through their society as well. We need to be aware of that. We need to be on guard for it. And we need to be able to diagnose the problem correctly so that we can apply the right medicine. Because the medicine is what you get in the second half of this, which is the hope that is coming for all those who put their trust in the Creator and not the creation. And I think that there are two beacons of hope in this dark and desperate passage. There are two verses, actually, that I'm sure that as Chris was reading it, you picked up on them, right? Verse 14 and verse 20. They're actually both really famous verses. What does verse 14 say? For all the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. There's an old hymn. God is working his purpose out as year unfolds to year. God is working his purpose out, and the time is drawing near. Nearer and nearer draws the time that shall surely be when the earth shall be filled with the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. Some of you will be familiar with that. That's the first thing that we're shown here. Second thing you'll find in verse 20. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. That but there is really important, by the way, because before that, he's talking about idols. These idols that don't profit. And then he says, but, and there's the hinge, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Here are our two hopes. Right? The first one, let's start with them in reverse, in verse 20. Right? But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. What's that about? What's that about? That verse is essentially about the sovereignty of God. It's about the fact that God rules all things. It's showing Habakkuk that in the midst of this evil, in the midst of this seemingly intractable problem, that there is a God on his throne of holiness from where he will preside over all the injustice of the world, and he will judge it in his time. That is supposed to remind you as a person of faith that no matter how bad things seem, no matter how bad the environment seems to get, no matter how corrupt governments and individuals and people seem to get, that there is going to come a time where God will say of all evil, overruled. Where he will come and he will put things right. That there is a God on the throne of the universe. That there is someone at the wheel. There is someone at the helm. Right? That your life and that history are not just careening around randomly like a drunken man on a Friday night. So there is somebody steering you whether you know it or not. Right? It gives you hope. It gives you hope that there is a hand on the rudder of the universe, that we're not just all headed for oblivion and the heat death of the universe, that we're actually, somebody has a purpose for everything that is happening in the world right now. But that should encourage you. That should give you clarity as you live your life in a chaotic world. But it should also humble you. It should actually deal with your pride. And it should humble you by reminding you that if you knew exactly what God knows, you would be doing exactly what he's doing right now in your life. Do you ever think about that? If God truly is omniscient, if he truly is omnipresent, if he truly knows all things, and if he truly is all-powerful, then he's doing what he needs to do in your life right now. And if you were him, if you knew everything that he knew, you'd be doing exactly the same thing. That's a very different way to see your struggles. It's a very different way to see your trials, and it is all founded upon the hope that the Lord is in his holy temple. Right? When it says, let all the earth keep silence before him, how much of our prayer life is spent anxiously worrying in God's direction? How much of our prayer life is spent just silently bowing before him and acknowledging him as the Lord? You know, the fact that it says he's in his holy temple means that he is deserving of all worship and of all praise. When we come to worship on a Sunday, this is the thing that clarifies our vision. We are acknowledging that the Lord is in his holy temple, and we keep silence before him. It's not just a bunch of noise and fury. It is so important, right? You have this statement here in Habakkuk that it is God who ultimately rules the details of your life, that it is God who ultimately rules the universe. And I know that can be hard to swallow. Because listen, people have been struggling with this one for centuries. Okay, so if that is true then, you might be saying, is God in control or are we responsible for our actions? Which one is it? And I'm sorry to say, the Bible's answer is yes. God is both absolutely in control and you are both totally responsible for your actions. Please don't ask me how that works out philosophically because I'm not clever enough to know how. I'm just going with what I see in the Bible. God is in control and you have agency and you are responsible. Think about it. This is a hard thing to wrap our heads around. But let me show you how this sparks hope in a world full of evil. If you really believed, if you truly, truly believed that your actions and your prayers were determinative in changing the plan of God, you would never pray again. You just wouldn't. If you were really thinking about it, if your prayers were what determined the course of your life and the world, you wouldn't touch that with a 100-foot barge pole. You'd stop praying. Because think about it this way. Think back to what you wanted as a child, right? And nothing when you were a teenager. When you look back as a teenager on what you wanted as a child, what did you think about that? Oh, that was stupid. Why did I want those things? I'm so much more mature now. Okay, but think about when you were in your 20s and you look back on yourself as a teenager. What did you think about the things you wanted when you were a teenager? Oh, so immature. I want more mature and different things now because I've lived life, I've become wiser. But think about yourself at the age you are now if you're above your 20s. I am, unfortunately. What do you think about yourself in your 20s? Well, I didn't know anything. I'm much more mature now. I know what I want now. I was a fool back then. Here's the secret. You're a fool now. And you kind of always have been. That's the clarity that we need about ourselves. So we don't know what should happen. We don't know what the world deserves. We don't know what people deserve. We don't even know how to direct our own lives. Sometimes we even struggle to know what to have for breakfast. So how are we supposed to know how to guide the world? If your prayers were completely determinative, you would never pray again. But here's the flip side of that. If your prayers didn't matter, if you believed that everything was determined, then you'd have no incentive to actually cry out against injustice and strive for justice like Habakkuk clearly does here. The Bible is full of people crying out for justice and then enacting that justice in their society and in their culture. I mean, what do you think the prophets were called to do? You know, I read a book recently that called the prophets in the Bible God's covenant enforcement officers. Right? When God's people were not living according to his rules and his covenant, he'd send the boys round. And they were the prophets, and they would call his people to account. And the reason they did that was because they knew that God was on his throne, but they also knew that his people needed to obey his ways. Those are the two things, the paradox, the tension that you need to keep in mind. Because friends, there is no plan B. There is only plan A. And that is what God has in mind. Eventually, every argument against the rule of God, the sovereignty of God in what seems like a chaotic and unfair world will be brought to silence at the foot of his throne. Because when he comes again, we will have nothing to say because we'll see him as he is. And all we will be able to do is lay our hand over our mouth and worship. And worship. Because the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Maybe one of the things God is pointing out in your life today is that you need to be silent, be still, and know that he is God, and know that he will be exalted among the nations. Maybe you need to stop anxiously striving and learn to rest in him. You know, maybe you need to help your spouse do that, or your kids do that. Maybe you need to help your friends do that. Be still and know that he is God. That's the first beacon of hope, the spark of hope in a dark world we find, the sovereignty of God. Get into it, read about it, study it. Read Jonathan Edwards. I can give you a list of people. It really is a comfort. But the second is probably my favorite verse in this entire passage. For the earth will be filled with the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. The hope that you're supposed to have as a person of faith is the glory that's yet to come. The glory that's yet to be revealed. The glory that's going to outstrip even the greatest of human achievements in a way that a thunderclap outstrips the breath of a gnat. That's what it's going to be like. You know, we saw earlier, didn't we, that the reason for all this brokenness, or all this evil is human pride, which stems from trying to cover ourselves in glory. Isn't that what the problem is? But verse 14 promises that one day all the earth, including us, will be immersed in what? God's glory. We'll drink it in. We'll be full to overflowing of it, so full to overflowing that we'll pour it out into one another in a never-ending cycle and experience of glory. We'll swim in it. It'll cover absolutely everything to overflowing. This is the glory, the majesty, the beauty that we were made for. You'll finally be immersed in it. This glory will make all the little glories we try and scrape together in this life look like a little dung heap compared to Ben Nevis. Right, the one day God's glory is going to sweep away all other competing glories and idols, and we will be left with a flawless ocean of perfection to enjoy forever. Forever. And there's a hope there, but there's also a warning there. You know, Jesus picks up on this in his parables. In the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about building your house on something. He talks about building your house on the rock, which is his word. And he says that if you do not build your house upon his word, that when the flood of judgment comes, when God comes to cover the earth in his glory, you will be swept away along with the lesser glories that you were building your life on. But if you build your life upon the glory of the Lord Jesus and the glory of the gospel, you will stand firm because you're already beginning to sample and drink in the glory in which you will be immersed for all eternity. And for everyone who refuses to center their life on that grace, and I want to be clear about this, you will be swept away into eternal judgment. That is what is waiting. Right? What's the best way to survive a flood? Pop question. Get to higher ground. That's the way you survive a flood. The Bible is clear. There is a flood coming. God is very clear about that time and time again. How do you survive the flood of God's judgment? You get to higher ground. You build your hope on the rock. You ascend the hill of the Lord. It's why in the Psalms, God is described as a mountain, as a high place to which the righteous man runs and is safe. Habakkuk already talks about going up into a tower, doesn't he? That's how you get away from it. You escape the flood of judgment and experience the flood of glory by getting up into the high place, by taking refuge in God alone. And you pray to him and you ask, the dearest idol I have known, whate'er that idol be, help me to tear it from thy throne and worship only thee. So how do you do that? If you're here this morning and you're a Christian and you feel like that hope is dim in your life, how do you lay hold of that? Or if you're here and you're not a Christian and you might want to lay hold of that hope for the first time, how do you do that? And you find it actually in verse 16. You will have your fill of shame instead of glory. The cup in the Lord's hand will come to you. You're familiar with the cup, aren't you? There's an image that recurs throughout the Bible of a cup that the Lord has in his right hand, and it represents his anger and his wrath against all evil and sin and injustice. And at periodic times, he says that the people who will refuse to worship him, he will make drink that cup down to the dregs. And that is the cup that we deserve. It is the cup that is full of our injustice, full of our pride, full of our idolatry, essentially the cup that is full of our shame. But the wonderful thing is that the God in whose hand that cup is sent his Son to drink that cup in your place. Jesus Christ, who Philippians chapter 2 tells us was full of glory, emptied himself of that glory and filled himself with shame by dying on a cross and drinking that cup of God's wrath down to its dregs, so that you and I, who deserve to be filled with shame, could be filled with glory instead. That is the gospel. That is the hope. In the gospel, you are given not the cup of shame, but the cup of blessing. That flood of glory, the only glory which only really matters and only really lasts. That's how you can have the hope that you'll see the glory of God covering the earth, because Jesus took your shame and covered you in his glory. And Christian, what you might need to lay hold of this morning is that when he looks at you, even if you feel ashamed of the things that you've done or haven't done or the things that are in your heart, you can look at the gospel and say that God is pleased with me because there's no more shame for me to drain. Jesus has drained it. And one day I will swim in an ocean of everlasting glory. Isn't that good news? Don't you want to take that to the people in your life? I mean, the gospel is so much bigger than we give it credit for, isn't it? It's a wonderful thing. So let me close with this. The upshot of all this is that because of the gospel, as a Christian, if you would call yourself a Christian here this morning, you get to be neither cynical or naive. Right? Can you see here? You get this incredible pessimism. Human beings are lost, and there is nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. And the cycle of nations like Babylon has just repeated itself time and time again from then till now, and it will repeat itself in the future. Pessimism. But there's incredible optimism as well. You know, the optimism here is that one day everything is going to be made right. We don't have to have the burden of fixing everything or even fixing ourselves, because God will come and he will do it. And he's already starting to do it amongst us, his people. We are the first fruits of the resurrection and the new creation that is to come. Listen, are you a cynic or are you more of a naive optimist? Many of us tend to fall on one or two of those spectrums, right? Are you a Tigger or an Eeyore? It's sort of the A.A. Milne way of looking at the world that I love. He's becoming one of my favorite theologians. Which one are you? Listen, if you're going to be a person of faith, if you're going to see things clearly, you kind of need to be both. And the way you get there is by meditating on the hope that we've just talked about, meditating on the gospel, realizing that you are so lost that it took the Son of God to come and die for you and drink the cup for you, but that you are so loved that he was glad to do that. And he would do it all over again if he needed to, which he doesn't, because he died once and for all. So let's be people who build our hope on Jesus, build our hope on that glory to come, build our hope not on this world or the things of this world, but build our hope on our Savior. And then let's go into a world full of evil and do what we can, because we have a hope in the glory yet to come. Let's pray. Father, remind us day in and day out and every hour of the wondrous, glorious, matchless gospel. Lord, help us to see our world clearly. Deliver us from naivety. Help us not to pretend that we can sort everything out if we just try a little harder. But help us also to see past that, to see where Jesus is with you, where he's reigning, and where one day he will come again. Thank you that there's a time coming where the earth will be filled with the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. And help us to build our hope on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness, for we ask it in his name. Amen.